Now, one of the members of the pro-Trump Proud Boys militia, who played a leading role in the storming of the US Capitol, has been jailed for 18 years. Ethan Nordean was filmed orchestrating the attack in 2021 with a loudspeaker. Another member of the group, Dominic Pizzola, described as one of its most violent, was given a 10-year sentence by the court in Washington. This comes after a 17-year sentence was handed to US Army veteran Joe Biggs. He was seen as an instigator in the January the 6th storming of the US Capitol, along with Zachary Rell, who was handed a 15-year sentence on Thursday. Well, elsewhere, shots are continuing to fire across the Republican battlefield. Yesterday, the Republican nominee hopeful, Nikki Haley, said the Senate is the most privileged nursing home in the country, and she called for mental competency tests for older members of the Senate, where the average age is 64 years old. Let's speak to Dr. Evan Lawrence, who worked for Congress under President Bush and is now senior lecturer at the University of Central Lancashire, and Peter Chowka, who's a veteran political analyst and contributor to AmericanThinker.com. Evan, your reaction to these sentences laid down to the Proud Boys members, were they overly harsh? Are they trying to make an example of them, or do you think this was just?
I think they were certainly trying to make an example of them, but I think probably fair when we look at the kind of the details of the case. Most of these guys were military and had military training, so at some point would have had backing and support of the U.S. government to go to school, go continue with their lives, things like that. And so for them then to kind of work to disrupt the the foundations of American democracy, I think is a fairly big deal. So I don't think that the sentences handed down were unreasonable, and they were certainly under the sentencing guidelines that were allowed.
Yeah, Peter, what was your reaction?
Well, I thought the sentences were rather extreme, but on the other hand, they were convicted. And I checked social media to see what's going on there. And an example is, of course, you have Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Republican representative from Georgia. She tweeted yesterday, quote, "Proud Boys organizer Joseph Biggs sentenced to 17 years by U.S. District Judge Timothy Kelly. How many violent Black Lives Matter rioters are serving 17 years, end quote." Now, this comment, of course, and many others on social media relate to the summer of riots after the George Floyd death in Minnesota in 2020, when there were over 500 riots around the United States, burnings, lootings, deaths, federal buildings taken over and torched in Portland, Oregon, a police station burned to the ground in Minneapolis, and hardly anyone, if anyone, was arrested or prosecuted for what seemed like at least a mini-insurrection there. So a lot of people are looking at this and saying, are there two standards of justice? Not that these guys, the Proud Boys or whomever, should be punished for their wrongs if convicted by a jury of their peers, but what about all the other crimes that we see in this now crime-ridden country of the United States, which are going unpunished?
But, Peter, there's an awful lot of whataboutery here, isn't there? And isn't this symptomatic of the problem?
They're completely different crimes as well. We're talking about the foundations of American democracy versus a violent protest. Riots that are criminal, certainly, but not aimed at bringing down or burning the Capitol building and stopping American democracy. So I think these are very, very different things, and you're getting very dangerously close to being, racist when we start talking about, well, why aren't the Black people in jail for this? Well, the Black people aren't in jail for this because they weren't doing anything that was trying to subvert American democracy and bring down the American government.
I beg to disagree, Dr. Evan Lawrence. In Portland, Oregon, mobs there of Antifa radicals for at least 100 nights running attacked and in some cases burned a federal building in Portland, Oregon. And I'm not saying these guys should not have been prosecuted and given their just desserts in court. But a crime in the United States is out of control, and you cannot deny that people who, and it's not a case of racism. Whites are committing a lot of crimes too, flash mobs, thefts, looting, burning, and I'm not the one that's saying this. Just look at social media. I'm simply reporting what about half or more of people on Twitter are saying in response to these convictions and sentences this week.
Sure, but Peter, in what way is this helpful to the debate in America at the moment?
Well, I think it's actually irrelevant. I would prefer to talk about the upcoming election, the candidates, President Biden, former President Trump, and the others who are challenging, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who I think is running one of the most interesting campaigns challenging President Trump.
Well, tell us a bit more about that, because the latest poll shows that Trump is the top choice for nearly 60% of Republican voters. That's according to a poll in the Wall Street Journal. Do you think that candidates like Robert F. Kennedy, how much of a challenge can they pose?
Well, that remains to be seen. Kennedy is a long shot, but at the moment he's the only serious challenger among the Democrats to President Biden. And he's a candidate of big ideas. I've written more than a half dozen articles about him. And he's the only critic of the political power of the U.S. medical establishment currently running for national office. That is the COVID-19 lockdowns, masks, vaccine mandates, which has a lot of support, actually. And it gets into the issue of the country is not so much divided now between left and right, but between establishment and anti-establishment. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr., like President Trump, for example, represents the anti-establishment wing of this left-right nexus. So it remains to be seen if he can put a successful campaign together. He's being largely blacklisted by the mainstream media, except for more than a dozen appearances on Fox News. But he's extremely articulate, and I just find his candidacy out of left field here extremely interesting in this year.
Do you find it interesting, Evan?
I mean, Kennedy as a non-establishment candidate, I think is funny considering his background, coming from the Kennedy family and all of that, historical political dynasty. But, when you look at the way that the American people are kind of divided at the moment, your other correspondent is correct. We are looking at a establishment versus a non-establishment kind of divide in the United States, where you have large swaths of the population who no longer trust the government. And those that don't trust the government are and tend to be Trump supporters, and Trump and that kind of anti-establishment support. So whether Kennedy is going to be able to, put forward a credible candidacy and become a candidate in his own right, I don't know. But I think it will be an interesting thing to watch coming up.
Does it suggest that populism isn't just the reserve of the right? It can come from all sides.
I mean, I think so. It's one of those where, you have a very, very divided society at the moment, and both sides are equally distrustful of the government at the moment, and rightly so in a lot of cases. Gun crime, the economy, all of these kind of things are really big issues in the United States, and the government has really been seen not to be doing anything about it. And where we go from there, I don't know. So I think populism is certainly one of the driving forces in this election cycle.
Okay, Dr. Evan Lawrence and Peter Chowka, both thanks very much indeed. It's 9:35 now. This is Good Morning Scotland with Graham Stewart. The headlines so far this morning.